guys, how are you? I hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing a movie review. This movie is a horror film from the United States, English language, released in the year 2014, directed by Alfonso Gomez-Rejon, and this film is called The Town That Dreaded Sundown. So this is actually a remake of the 1970s classic of the same name. This movie takes place many years after the original. This town is still gripped in the mental scars of the murders that took place in the 1940s, and every Halloween they mark this day with a screening of a movie that had basically depicted these horrible crimes. So this town don't exactly like this because they're always known by these horrible murders. So on this particular night, on this particular screening, this girl and her boyfriend decide to skip the viewing and go into the woods to get a little bit romantic. But then their romance is cut short by a masked man who ends up killing the boyfriend and letting the woman go. So this woman reports the crime, and then as more bodies continue to show up, it actually appears that there's a copycat killer that is taking inspiration from the killings of the 40s. So this woman that has survived the ordeal, she starts to investigate. She goes through the history of Texarkana, the place she's from, and she starts to uncover little clues here and there in order to try and get the identity of this killer before more bodies start showing up. So whether or not she can do that, that's something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on The Town That Dreaded Sundown. As I said, this is a remake of a classic film that has a strong following, so I think that it was a blessing for me that I haven't actually seen the original, because a lot of these remakes from the 70s, they tend to be a little bit of a curse on their own, because when I go into a film such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you've got Last House on the Left, Hills Have Eyes, I Spit in Your Grave, all these remakes that you watch, you're constantly comparing the original with the remake. You know, this scene was better in the remake, that scene was better in the original, and you're not really enjoying the remake for what it is. So not having seen the original, I was given this every opportunity to impress me, and I can say that there were moments that really impressed me, and there were moments that really disappointed me with this film. Now, to start off with, I thought it was very impressive in the level of respect that Alfonso Gomez-Rejon has for the original source material, in that it's not so much a remake on its own, it's not just there to basically emulate what the 70s film captured, it's here to basically continue on from what the original had. So I really like the way that it intertwined original with remake. I thought, the way that the original was played in the film is basically the movie that everybody's watching in the drive-thru at the start of the film. So it's a continuation, but at the same time it feels like a remake, but it just feels like it feels like it was made by a fan of this particular film, and not only a fan of The Town That Dreaded Sundown in the 70s, but 70s horror films in general, because although this movie takes place many years later, it still feels like a film set in the 70s. By the visuals, it felt very genuine in the way that it actually went about it. It felt very colourful, it felt very surreal, it felt like an exploitation film, but at the same time being set in a more modern day and having the modern day sort of element to it. So I think that for lovers of 70s horror films, you're going to really like this. I felt that it was a love letter to those period in time when I actually felt horror films were, especially in the United States, were at their best. And so Alfonso, he really does combine the two very well, and that's the most intriguing part of it, is that visually it does feel like a 70s horror film, and the 70s horror, the 70s original really plays a strong impact in this film as well. So it's a very respectful remake, and I think a lot of people will appreciate that very thing about it. So the other things that I liked about the movie is that it had a very strong sense of psychology. The psychological horror was ever present. You don't know the identity to this killer, so he's going around doing whatever he does, and you feel that it could be the person next to them, or it could be that person, could be that person. So the level of mystery and the concealed identity of this killer really plays strongly, and it really plays to the psychology. It felt like this whole town was gripped by paranoia, and that the hands of paranoia were sucking the life out of the whole town, and you felt that you were on the edge of your seat, that you really couldn't feel comfortable at any stage because this killer could turn up at any moment. So there's always that ever-present psychology that I thought was in there for the first 3/4 of the film. The acting was decent. I really didn't like the main character, who was this investigator. She was kind of giving you an insight into what's happened, and she's trying to unveil who the killer was, and you've kind of seen that character many times before, and this is where the level of predictability to the film comes in. Although the visuals are very unique, although it is a love letter to films of yesteryear, you still feel that the underlying presence of the film was controlled by a formula that you've seen many times before, and so you kind of think you know where this film is going to go, you know who is going to survive, you know who is going to die, and it does play a strong sense of deja vu. And so, although you are going to be distracted by how beautiful the film looks, underneath I thought it was very predictable in the sense that, you know, the way that was told, you know, the investigative reporter, it felt like another version of Zodiac. If you've seen the movie Zodiac by David Fincher, a brilliant film, and that was more of a mystery whodunit, and this is definitely a strong resemblance to that film in that you don't know who this killer is picking off, and you've got this investigator who is trying to go into the history, and she's trying to uncover everything. So you just feel like you're seeing a lesser version of Zodiac, which is something I really didn't like. I would have liked it to, you know, be creative both visually and storytelling wise, but unfortunately it doesn't have that. And then right at the end, I thought that was one of the worst endings I've seen. It took me off guard. It was not a predictable ending, but it was an absolutely ridiculous ending. It felt like it was a ridiculous ending for the sole focus of just taking you by surprise. It didn't make any sense whatsoever. It basically contradicted everything that the film had going for it. And so in the end, what you get is a movie that doesn't reward you for, you know, sticking it out. It doesn't rewarding you for wanting to know who the killer was, because you'll have no idea who it is. It's because it's that ridiculous that it just pulls the rug from under you and it says, surprise, you didn't see that coming, but of course you didn't see that coming, because it contradicts all the flow that the film has, and it's just a stupid ending for the sake of just, you know, revealing a shocking twist. And for that, I really didn't like it. I thought it was very disappointing the way that it executed it. Having said that, there are bits and pieces that are very well done that I would recommend it, especially if you are a fan of 70s horror. But if you go into it expecting a rewarding and satisfying climax, you're going to be bitterly disappointed. I thought it was a horrible ending in what was a forgettable film, but at the same time, there are bits and pieces there that warrant me to recommend at least one viewing. So overall, for The Town That Dreaded Sundown, I was really disappointed by the ending, but having said that, it wasn't a brilliant film to start off with, but couldn't help but feel it should have been a little bit better than it actually turned out to be. So overall, for The Town That Dreaded Sundown, I'm going to give it 2.5 stars. Go out there and see it, but just don't get your hopes up too high. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.